Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Endseeker, Global Warming, on October 27th on Metal Blade Records. The album has 9 tracks, 40 minutes in length, and this is the band's 4th full-length studio album. They are a German death metal band. Looking at the design of this record, it may trick you into think that this album is super dense. I mean, it is from a soundscape point of view, but when you look at the design and you look at the fluidity of the record, you realize that the album is actually a lot more dynamic than it appears. This album has a sense forward. It never really pauses, it doesn't break, there's no gaps, but it always feels like it's carrying the listener from track to track. Obviously, having 9 songs and being 40 minutes in length, it helps the experience. It makes the album more playable, it makes the experience a lot better, it's easier for the listener to digest the overall density of the album because the record doesn't overextend itself, and it also doesn't allow the album to saturate the listener with that sound, with that presence. So great design, great length in order to enhance the qualities of the record and not necessarily enhance the things that make this album at times feel a little bit too compact. As far as the sound goes, like I said, it is a dense record, but it's because of the way the guitars and bass come through together in unison, but even separate from one another with a very similar signature sung in and sung out. This is a record that's not overly produced. It has an old school effect to it, and with that old school effect comes that more gritty soundscape coming out of the guitars. You can almost hear and feel the strings of the guitars being played on every single track. They have this fuzziness to them that allows the edges of the sound and the edges of the song to be a little bit blurry. Not just the guitars doing that, but the bass is also doing that. You may not notice that at first glance because of how strong the guitar sound is and how predominant it is in the overall sound experience, but in tracks where the bass pops in, it becomes very clear that it has the same signature, it has the same identity as the guitars. So when you have those two elements working together and having that similar output, that obviously creates an impact that allows you to feel like this album has that same feel, that same vibe, that same sonic fingerprint across each and every single song. And on one hand, that sort of sound could allow the record to become slightly repetitive or predictable. What they did to counterbalance that was infusing some more melodic guitars into the sound, sometimes a little bit more driven, sometimes a little bit more dark, but those riffs really add a sense of cutting through the density of the album and clear things up a little bit. The other element that they added in order to give this record a different experience track in and track out, even though the backdrop is the same, are the guitar solos. The guitar solos are perhaps the only guitar element on this album that has clarity to it. It doesn't have that same fuzz, it doesn't have that same ruggedness. It's very clear, crystal clear, and that gives it its own identity within the songs, and it gives a moment of clarity within the songs as well. So really important. These two elements are really important. The third element is also important, and perhaps one of the most important ones in terms of allowing these songs to have more movement in order to feel more dynamic, in order to separate themselves from one another, is the drum sound. I thought the drum sound on this record was on point. It breaks, or it helps break through that density, but it doesn't take away heaviness from the sound. It actually adds heaviness to the sound, but it has a more clear, a more defined heaviness to the way the sound comes across. This allows the drums to drop down, feel a little bit lower in the mix, having the guitars and bass a little bit more over the top, so you can have that fuzz on the edge of your sound, and this becomes a nice balanced song in and song out because it allows the tracks to have internal movement, not just forward movement, but internal movement between these 3 different parties. So the drums play a very important role on how these songs have dynamic mechanisms within them and then dynamic mechanisms between them. But also we cannot forget about, like I said, the guitar solos and those more driven melodic or even darkened riffs that really separate themselves from that signature sound that is so predominant from the first all the way to the last song. Once it comes to the vocal performance is consistent. The heaviness that it gives, the heaviness that it offers, is also very consistent. So it's another element that doesn't really change from start to end, but for a record like this, you don't really need that much change there. You kind of want to create a sandwich, if you will. So on one hand, you have the bass and guitars with that fuzz, with that distortion at the top, and then on the other end, you have the heaviness of the vocals, the consistency of the heaviness on the other. And then in between, you have that drum sound that fluctuates, but always providing heaviness. And that becomes the overall palette of sound that this album puts forward, and not just sound but of experience as well. The way you incorporate the vocals into that design, the way you bring the vocals into the overall song structures is really important. And I don't mind the consistency in the delivery because it matches the overall aggression that the album has. An album that has that death metal, old school death metal approach, but it's an album that really lives off of the riffage. Now, the guitar playing on this record becomes the calling card. You can move it a little bit beyond that grit, and you can see the more driven riffs, the more melodic riffs, the more blackened riffs. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the guitars, the riffage, and where they're gonna take you, sung in and sung out. It's a great old school style sounding album, and I think they hit the mark by keeping it short, 9 songs, 40 minutes. Really allows you to digest this album and digest it well, and don't feel like you've had enough of it by the time you reach the last song. You're kind of happy to go back again to the beginning because it's a meaty record, but a record that you have a lot of fun listening to. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Wheel of Torture. Killer opening riff. It really creates a sense of heaviness right from the get-go with that riff, and then the drums help catapult the track forward. They create the movement. The riff feels, and the guitar sound overall feels a little bit more stagnant, and the drums feels like it's the motor that's pushing this track and moving it along. There are some more methodic movements within the song, and then there are also some more aggressive moments within the song. The vocals kind of help set the tone between the two, and it helps carry the listener through the track as well. So they have a very important role, not just in offering more heaviness to the track, but also guiding the experience all around. The solo section is great because it breaks away from that sound. It feels a little bit more clear, and then it has a chorus that really feels like it hits the nail on the head. It has a very hooky chorus, not necessarily from a vocal standpoint, but in terms of where it comes in the song and the melody that it carries from a soundscape point of view. Next we have Hanging Gardens, the drums and guitars together on point. Great song, opening up with like a bleh, really sets the mark. I mean, when you hear that at the opening of a song, you know you have a banger. And this track, immediately after it starts to move, it creates this essence of a circle pit. It's a track that has almost like a riptide movement to it, and that's why I call it like a circle pit style song, because it's one of those tracks that you feel like it's circling, but it's circling with movement, and it has a lot of internal movement. It has a great tempo, great heaviness, moves really well. The chorus is very melodic. It slows down the track a little bit, but by slowing down the track a little bit, it allows the verses to feel more impactful. It allows the verses to feel more direct. This is a song where you can hear the bass, you can hear it well, and you can see that grittiness that exists on the guitar sound also coming from the bass, and it becomes clear that the two elements have a very similar signature output throughout the entire record, but in this song the veil comes down and you're able to see it a little bit more clear. Another epic solo on this track, and it's a song that really lives off of the great guitar sound that it has. Last but definitely not least, Nemesis. This is a different track from anything else on the record. It's the last song on the album, and I think it plays an important role because it resets your palette. It's one of the darkest, perhaps more blackened songs that this album has to offer. And I think coming last is no surprise because it really breaks away from the pack. It's completely different, or it gives a different experience than all of the 8 previous songs did. So having this song at the end, it resets your palette and allows you to go back to the beginning of the record because you almost forget how dense the rest of the album is, because this song is not. This is a really driven, more blackened song that has different characteristics, has different sound experiences, that moves differently, a different structure. The guitars sound different. It has a completely different context. It's a very unique song. And having this last, like I said, works really well because it almost allows you to forget the previous 8 songs, press play again, and go back to the beginning. Important track, not just because of how it sounds, not just because of how different it is, but because of where it sits in the overall design of the record. This is it, Endseeker with Global Warming, out October 27 on Metal Blade Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.